Winning Blueprint presents.
In the lab room, Chicago Bears.
The Bears. The Bears. That can be a good thing, or that can be the Bears. Or it could be the Bears. See, those are different. And you have to be paying close attention to notice the difference. There's the Bears and the Bears. The Bears. Hi, I'm Lou. This is the lab follow-up for the Chicago Bears. Thank you for joining me. The Bears, every single season, give you a little of both. At the beginning, it's always the Bears. It's upbeat. There's a lot of cheerfulness in that Bears. A lot more bravado behind it. The Bears. Like, hey, what are you going to do? We're the Bears. And toward the middle part and into the latter half of the season, that bravado and that spunk turns into despair. It starts to turn into the Bears. As if, here we go again. And it happened once again in 2012 for the Chicago Bears. So how do you go 10-6, miss the playoffs, and have your head coach fired all in one season? How is that possible? 10-6 for most teams is a productive and successful season. Now look, at the end of the day, there's only going to be one team that is truly happy with their season. You can win 10 games, go to the postseason, and be eliminated in the first round, in the wild card weekend. What is the difference between that and going 10-6 and missing the postseason? It's a huge difference. When you make it to the tournament, you give yourself a chance. Now, not getting it done once you get there is a totally separate issue. But getting there is half the battle. The Bears didn't achieve that in 2012. Neither did they do it in 2011. And thus, L.A.B. Smith has been fired. Now, I didn't know if I agreed with it or not, but I'll tell you one thing. There's nothing worse than feeling like you're stagnant. You're stuck in neutral. You're stuck in the mud. There's nothing worse than feeling like you're not moving forward. It's called insanity to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and not getting results. It's like banging your head against a brick wall. What does that accomplish? You're not hurting the brick. You're just hurting your head. And that's what the Bears were doing over and over again with L.A.B. Smith. So, in essence, I got the move. I wasn't totally in agreement with it, but when you keep starting the season 7-1, 7-2, 7-3, and then failing to make the postseason, something needs to be done. And that something was firing L.A.B. Smith. So how did we get to this point? How did the Bears find a way to start the 2012 season at 7-1 and manage to go 10-6 and miss the postseason? There's a lot of factors that if you did not pay close attention to this Bears team in 2012, you would have missed. And you would have missed the underlying points as to why the Bears were what they were and why they didn't go to the postseason. So let's get into why the Bears missed the postseason, went 10-6, and have a new head coach in the form of Mark Tresman. On the outside looking in, this 2012 season for the Bears makes absolutely no sense. Because if you look at it from afar, you say, how is this not a successful season? The Bears were plus 20 in the turnover differential. I mean, That's a staggering number. The Bears were getting turnovers in drones. I mean, there were games where the Bears could do no wrong defensively. Offensively, they didn't have to do anything but put it in cruise control because the defense was handling not only their end of the bargain, but they were scoring points for the offense too. There were weeks when this defense carried this Bears team. Plus 20 in the turnover differential is phenomenal. And that's what the Bears were in 2012. So you look at that. You look at the fact that the Bears only gave up 17.3 points a game. That was third in the NFL. So they weren't giving up points. They were forcing turnovers. They won 10 games. How is it that they didn't make the postseason and their coach was fired? Funny that you should ask that question. Because if you weren't paying attention, this is a head scratcher. But when you delve a little deeper, you see exactly what the Bears were. They were a team that wasn't as good as their record indicated. And look, Bill Parcells said it best. You are what your record says you are. And the Bears are a 10-win team. They're a solid group. You put an inferior team in front of the Chicago Bears, they will dispose of that inferior team. But that's where you draw the line with the Chicago Bears. That's when it stops. The Bears were 1-7 versus teams that made it to the postseason this year. So essentially, any team that finished with a record over 500, the Bears were 1-7 against. Won't get it done in the National Football League. You can't play the Tennessee Titans. You can't play the Detroit Lions. You can't play the Jacksonville Jaguars every single week. The Arizona Cardinals aren't on your schedule every week. You have to beat the Texans. You have to beat the Minnesota Vikings. You have to beat the Green Bay Packers. You have to beat good teams. You can't just beat the Indianapolis Colts and have that be the only team that makes it to the playoffs that has a winning record on your schedule and have that be the only team you beat. And that's what the Bears essentially did in 2012. They didn't beat anybody of note. They picked on the Arizona Cardinals. They picked on the Detroit Lions. They picked on the Tennessee Titans and the Jacksonville Jaguars. They picked on the inferior teams in the National Football League and got their victories. But when it came time to play big boy football, they couldn't pull their pants up and saddle it up and get it done. And that's what it boiled down to for the Chicago Bears in 2012. The Bears started this season 7-1. And they look like one of the best teams, not just in the NFC, in all of football. They were scoring points at an alarming rate, mostly because this defense was playing out of its mind, getting turnovers, and not only getting turnovers, but turning them into points. And they were doing it not only at home, but on the road. I mean, we saw this Bears team dismantle the Cowboys on Monday Night Football, on the big stage, in front of everyone. Turn the Cowboys over and turn it immediately into points. They disposed of the Jacksonville Jaguars in Jacksonville. Scored 40-something points in the process. The Bears were looking like a team that if you weren't careful with the ball, not only were they going to turn you over, they were going to turn it into points. And this offense was steady. The offensive line wasn't the best, but they were getting it done. Jay Cutler was starting to get comfortable with his targets. Brandon Marshall was in Chicago. He was starting to acclimate himself with Alshon Jeffrey and Earl Bennett and all those guys. They were starting to look like a team that could become dangerous. And then the middle of the season came. And the wake-up call came. And the tough games started to come. And the Bears wilted under the pressure. After starting 7-1, the Bears dropped their next 5 out of 6 games. Now, it's no coincidence that at the same time of this slide, they started playing really good competition. All of a sudden now, they're not playing Tennessee anymore. They're not playing Jacksonville anymore. Now, instead of it being Jacksonville, it's Houston. Instead of it being Detroit, it's Minnesota. So those games that were wins earlier in the season because the competition wasn't as great turned into losses. And in that stretch, when they lost 5 out of 6, somewhere in the shuffle, this Bears offense got lost. And I think what happened, and I talked about this at great lengths on my program, I thought that the offense started to become reliant on this defense to score points. It became easy for them to really relax and say, hey, the defense got it. The defense will take care of it. We'll just score our 14 points, and the defense will supply another 17 for us, and we'll be fine. And they became accustomed to the defense supplying them with points every single week, because for a stretch, when they started 7-1, every single week the Bears defense was producing some sort of points directly without the offense even having to set foot on the field. It was becoming ridiculous. This defense was really holding this team up. And I think after a while, the offense just got used to not having to do much. It became a crutch. And so when the defense stopped getting the turnovers, when the defense stopped producing points off of those turnovers, all of a sudden now it became more abundantly clear, more apparently clear that now the offense has to step up and score. And they couldn't do it. They could not score on their own. They couldn't produce 20 points by themselves with no assistance from the defense. And that was the undoing of the Chicago Bears in this season. The inability to score points offensively. You can score 27 when the defense is chipping in with 2 defensive touchdowns, or the defense gives you a defensive touchdown and sets you up first and goal from the opposing team's 20, and all you have to do is have a 3-play, 20-yard drive for a touchdown. It's easy to score points when the defense is breastfeeding you points. What happens when that faucet gets turned off and the turnovers stop and the points from the defense stops? What happens when that water, that stream of points that the defense was giving you, suddenly turns off and now you have to produce on your own? We saw what happened. The Bears averaged 14.1 points per game in that 6-game stretch where they struggled and lost 5 out of 6. That's where this season turned for the Chicago Bears. The inability to score points, manufacture points offensively without any help from this defense. 14.1 points a game won't win you any games in the National Football League. None. Even the worst teams in the league can find a way to piece together 16 points. To score 14.1 a game means you don't want to win football games. Because the defense was giving up 17.3 a game. And that's a dental floss thin number. You should be able to win 80% of your games giving up less than 20 points a game, giving up less than 18 a game. You give up 17 points, we're talking 2 touchdowns and a field goal. If you can't score more than 2 touchdowns and a field goal in any given game, you don't deserve to win. And the Bears could not do that consistently in 2012. So now that you understand why this Bears team didn't get it done in 2012, let's talk about what they need to do moving forward. Now you win 10 games, you go 10-6. And the Bears had opportunities to make it to the postseason. They had games that they should have won, could have won, didn't win. They had Seattle on the ropes. They lost a game. They had Green Bay in their clutches. They lost a game. They had games down the stretch at home and couldn't take care of business. So now you look at this team, you look at this franchise, you look at this roster, and you say to yourself, how do you improve on a 10-6 season and get back to the postseason and give yourself a chance? Well, it's not rocket science. I just told you that this team had struggles offensively. So you start there. And Lovie Smith was a defensive-minded coach. And a damn good one. I just told you that this defense was producing on the field. And the Bears defense every single season produced for Lovie Smith. So the defense wasn't the issue. Lovie Smith took care of what he was supposed to take care of, which is making sure this defense was a top 10 defense. And just about every year that he was the coach, this Bears defense was somewhere in the mix. But as a head coach, your whole team needs to be good. Not just the defense or the offense, depending on what type of coach you are. If you're an offensive coordinator that gets a job or a defensive coordinator that gets a job, you want to make sure that whatever you specialize in, the team excels at. But as a head coach, you have to make sure your team excels at every phase of the game. Offense, defense, and special teams, and the mental approach to the game. Limit the penalties, limit the mistakes, highlight your strengths, and minimize your weaknesses. And Lovie Smith did not do a great job of that. This defense was stellar. The offense was not. This offensive line has been a mess since I can remember. I mean, this offensive line has been a mess for at least the last 4, maybe 5 seasons. At first, we just pinned it on the Bears quarterbacks. We never really said, why are these quarterbacks not that good? We just always assumed that the Bears quarterbacks just weren't good because they just weren't good. We never stopped to really consider that maybe these quarterbacks aren't great, but they could be better if they had better protection. And so once Jay Cutler came and you solved the quarterback issue, now you're expecting this offense to take off. Well, it didn't. And the reason why it couldn't was because this offensive line, which had been porous the whole time, was finally being exposed. Now the quarterback isn't the problem. We know that for sure. So now you're looking at other issues. And now you realize, man, we have an offensive line problem. So the Bears tried to do everything that they could to rectify that problem without actually fixing the problem. Hey, our offensive line stinks. Let's get a new offensive coordinator that's going to make us rely on an offensive line that's not good. So they went and got Mike Martz. Why? I don't know. Because in a Mike Martz system, you have to have an offensive line that's going to give your quarterback time. Time to survey the field. Time to drop back 7 steps. Time to turn his back to the defense and turn back around and find receivers 30, 40 yards down the field. You weren't going to get that kind of time behind this Bears offensive line. And the Bears figured that out very quickly. So out went Mike Martz. In comes Mike Tice. And he was the offensive line coach while Mike Martz was there. So you're thinking, hey, he has intimate knowledge of this offensive line. He's going to fix this thing. He's going to know what he can call, what he can't call, and he's going to protect some of these liabilities along this offensive line. Wrong. You can't protect garbage. And that's what the Bears have along this offensive line. Trash. And it's time for the Bears to clean up some of this garbage. Now look, every piece along this offensive line isn't bad. There are some salvageable pieces along this offensive line. But your left tackle can't be questionable. In this league where left tackles are supposed to be dominant, where left tackles are the linchpin of your offensive line, you can't have Jamarcus Webb out there at left tackle. You just can't. It can't happen. You need a new left tackle. Okay? It's really simple. You need a new left tackle. So you know that the offense is the issue. We'll talk about all the needs of the Bears a little bit later. Let's talk about the acquisition of their new head coach. They got rid of Lovie Smith. And of course, with Lovie Smith's departure comes in a new group and a new cast of characters. So we start with the new head coach, Mark Trestman. Here's a coach that's been around the National Football League. The last couple of years, he spent his time in the CFL, in the Canadian Football League, coaching the Montreal Alouettes, leading them to championships. But he's been in the NFL. He's been around quarterbacks. He's been around good ones. He was the offensive coordinator when Steve Young had an MVP season in 1995. He was the offensive coordinator in Oakland when Rich Gannon had an MVP season in 2002. So he is a guy that knows what it takes to have quarterbacks excel in the National Football League. So he's not just some run-of-the-mill coach, some guy that the Bears just plucked out of thin air. They knew what they were doing. They have something in mind when they hired Mark Trestman. They've had the defensive-minded coach. They've went down that road. Now they're looking to bolster this offense. And the question still remains, and this is why Mark Tresman was really hyped, for this sole purpose, to answer this question. Will Jay Cutler ever reach his full potential? And if Mark Tresman does nothing else, he needs to tap into the full potential of Jay Cutler. Get it all out. Because we see what Jay Cutler can be. We've seen flashes. We saw it in Denver. The back-to-back 4,000-yard seasons where he was rolling out using the bootleg and slinging it all over the field in Denver. We saw those years in Denver. Then he started to kind of come back to the pack. We saw the arm. It's electric. We saw the athleticism. And then you kind of seen it in spurts. You never saw it for a full season. Then he gets injured. Then he's got the mental issue. Is he a head case? All of that needs to be put to rest. Now it's time for Jay Cutler to start acting like a top 10 quarterback in the National Football League. And it's Mark Tresman's job to get that out of Jay Cutler. Get him to approach the game from a different mental aspect. Get him to see the field differently. It's okay to force it to Brandon Marshall 12 times, but know that there are other options on the field that you can get it to. And spread the ball around. Have him utilize what the Bears have at receiver. They have talent. Alshon Jeffrey looks like a guy that if he can just focus and catch the football more often, he's going to be a player for the Bears. Earl Bennett, if he can stay healthy, will be an asset to Jay Cutler and the Chicago Bears. Devin Hester, if he stops whining and realizes that he has a place on his team and the Bears utilize him the way that he needs to be utilized, he can be an asset. So there's talent out at wide receiver for the Bears. Now they just have to harness it and reel it all in and get it all on the same page. And it's Mark Tresman's job to do all of that. Get Jay Cutler to see that he can be one of the best quarterbacks in the National Football League. If he approaches the game the right way, has the right mental approach, they fix this offensive line, and they start having the balance that they need to have, giving Matt Forte the football, spelling him at the right times, giving Michael Bush a little bit of the workload, and figuring out how to get this thing going in the right direction. So that's why Mark Tresman was hired. This defense had it on cruise control this year. Now they need this offense to catch up because they're losing. They're behind. The defense is here and the offense is lagging behind. They need it to kind of even out somewhat. Get this offense up to speed. So Mark Tresman has sought out the help of Aaron Kromer. And you remember him as the New Orleans Saints interim head coach when their season started. Now, they didn't get off to a good start under Aaron Kromer, and he was in over his head in New Orleans. There was nothing he could do about that situation. That was a lose-lose situation for him. But out of the deal came an offensive coordinator position in Chicago. And what Tresman is really looking for Kromer to do is come in and shore up this offensive line. Look, Mike Tice had an opportunity to do it. He failed. Kromer's job is to come in and get this offensive line to be good enough to have this Bears offense be what it's supposed to be. Not a 14.1 point a game offense, but an offense that can consistently score up over 20 points. This offensive line is a big part of why this Bears team struggled. And so Kromer's job is to come in and get this offense, more specifically this offensive line, to gel, to have some form of continuity and get it done and protect Jay Cutler. Open up holes for Matt Forte. Now, Kromer is not a miracle worker. Neither is Tresman. The Bears need to have the pieces in place to have these things happen. So what will it take to get this offense to where it needs to be? To catch up to this defense that's been dominant for the last 3 or 4 seasons. You start with the offensive line. We've talked about it already. I'm okay with the interior of this line. Lance Lewis, Roberto Garza. I'm okay with those guys. I don't have a problem with them. I have a problem with your tackles, though. And maybe not so much the right side as I am the left side. You could use, no, not use, you need a new left tackle. This Jamarcus Webb experiment, I'm done with it. Get you a real left tackle. Stop wasting time trying to make something work that isn't working. Stop trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Get a new left tackle. Look, if the Miami Dolphins don't want to pony up and pay Jake Long, what are you waiting on? You should be the first call to Jake Long. When his phone rings, on the other end should be the Chicago Bears. Hey, Jake, why don't you come on out to Chicago? Why don't we sit down, talk about this thing, and see if we can't get something done? If Jake Long wants $10 million, you should be willing to give him 12. That's how bad your left tackle situation is. Now, look, if you can't get Jake Long, if the Dolphins wake up and smell the coffee and pay Jake Long the money that he deserves, then you need to go looking elsewhere. There's probably not going to be many left tackles on the free agent market that's going to satisfy your needs. If there is, knock yourself out. There probably won't be. And so if you don't get Jake Long, go and get a left tackle in the draft. This isn't up for discussion. If you're the Bears, you need a left tackle. Jay Cutler can't be worrying about his blind side. He can't be worrying about the fact that he doesn't have time to go through his progressions and his reads. He needs to be able to know, I can go through my first read. If Brandon's not open, I can go to my second read. If Alshon's not open, I can come back to Earl Bennett or dump it off to Matt Forte in the flats. He shouldn't have to rush and say, hey, I don't have time. I'm just going to throw it to Brandon. That shouldn't be the case. And so that's one of your definite needs. Tight end. Okay, we've went down this road before. You had a tight end. I'm not going to beat you up over this. I've already beat you with a bat over the head all season long about not having a tight end. You had a tight end. You let Mike Martz come in, who devalues tight ends. You let him come in and run Greg Olsen out of town. You allowed him to trade him away because he didn't need him. Now you need a tight end and you don't have one. Okay, Kellen Davis is a backup. I thought Kellen Davis was going to flourish and become better because he was a raw project as a tight end out of Michigan State. But 6'8" is 6'8". And you're thinking, hey, 6'8", 6'7", 6'8", in the red zone, that's going to be a deadly weapon. No, Kellen Davis has been a huge disappointment. Now, I'm not saying you disregard the guy. There's a place for Kellen Davis on your roster, just not as your starting tight end. Go and find a real starting tight end. He needs to be a pass catcher and someone that can block somewhat. Even if his blocking isn't what you would like it to be, if he can catch the ball, get you 57 grabs a season for 600, 700 yards, that's what you're looking for. Find a real pass-catching threat for Jay Cutler. When Jay Cutler was at his best in Denver, he had tight ends that could catch the football. Get Jay Cutler a tight end. After the run game, guess who the quarterback's best friend is? You guessed it, the tight end. Get Jay Cutler a real pass-catching tight end. Please? Okay. So, if you get those things, this offense, I think, will be on the right track. This defense doesn't have a lot of pressing needs. This D-line is really solid. The linebackers, they're getting up there in age. You could use some youth along that linebacking corps, but they're fine. But if you want to get more youth, and I think that you need to, by all means, do that, whether it be free agency or the draft. The secondary, again, you're getting long in the tooth. Charles Tillman has been doing this for a long time. I remember when he was a rookie and he was leaping up and taking passes from Randy Moss. Oh, how long ago that was. He's still playing at a high level, as shown by him being voted to the Pro Bowl. Across from him was the interceptions leader in the National Football League in Tim Jennings. So you've got guys that are getting it done. But don't mistake production for age. These guys are still older. You need to find more corners that are younger that can learn from these guys and produce for you in the near future. So that's something that the Bears need to address as well. But if it's not broken, you don't have to fix it. Where it is broken, however, is at the safety position. Now, you can try to convince me that Chris Conte is a solid safety. You can try to convince me that Major Wright is your guy at safety. Not buying either one of those guys. Okay, you drafted Brandon Harden out of Oregon State, and he's an athletic marvel. He's 6'3". He runs a sub-4.5 40, but you can't get him to stay healthy. And I don't know if he'll ever be the safety that you think he has the potential to be. You need to draft another safety. Let's just put someone out there, put some more competition on the field. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But Craig Stelz, Major Wright, Chris Conte, it's just a hodgepodge of safeties. None of them really great. How about you find someone that can get it done? Or at least throw another name in that competition and see what comes out of it. Who knows? So, all in all, if you are the Bears, left tackle, without a doubt, your first issue you need to address through free agency or the draft. Tight end, I think, is right behind it. Get a real tight end. Jay Cutler needs it to help this offense flourish. Safety, you need a safety. In this offseason, I think your first goal should be to keep guys in-house. Now look, Brian Urlacher is getting up there in age. He's a free agent. You don't need to break the bank to pay him to have him back in Chicago. He needs to realize that he's a shell of himself. He's not the guy that he once was. And so he needs to realize that he needs to be compensated for who he is now, not what he was then. If you guys can come to some kind of mutual agreement on how much Brian Urlacher means to this franchise, you keep him, because Brian Urlacher is a Chicago Bear. He doesn't need to wear another uniform. So figure that out. Get him back in the fold. What is just as important, if not more important, is re-signing Henry Melton. Do not let this guy walk away. He's a perfect fit for what you want to do defensively. Henry Melton is a nuisance on your defensive line. One of the hardest guys to block on your defensive line is Henry Melton. You don't let him leave Chicago in the offseason. That should be priority number 1A, 1B, or 1C. This doesn't need to be put on the back burner. You find a way to get Henry Melton back in the fold in Chicago. What happened to your special teams in 2012? They just fell off of the map. You need to find a way to get your special teams back to being special. Someone took the special out of your special teams. That was just the teams in 2012. They need to be special again. Get Devin Hester back right mentally, because he's checked out mentally. He's talking about retirement and it's not fun anymore. Someone needs to get in his ear, talk some sense into Devin Hester, refocus him on what's important. Someone told him that he was a wide receiver first and a special teams guy second. You need to rewire his brain and get him to understand that where he's going to make the Hall of Fame, if he ever inspires to make it one day, is at special teams. Receiver is your secondary job on this team. You are a special teams threat first. Someone needs to remind him of that. If you can get him to understand that and tell him, look, we value you on offense. You can be a threat for us out wide, but you are a special teams player first. Get him to understand that, and maybe, just maybe, the Bears can get back to being dominant on special teams again. Because you need it. You could have used a shot in the arm from your special teams in 2012. Maybe you make the postseason if you would have gotten one. You didn't, and so you didn't make the postseason. How about you talk to Devin Hester, get him to refocus, and get him back to the level that he was at just 2, 3, 4 years ago, when he was the most dominant special teams player, not just in the league, but potentially in league history. And basically, that's where the Chicago Bears stand. That's going to do it for the Chicago Bears Lab follow-up. Thank you for joining me today on the program. Come back when we talk about the 21st team in the draft. We're not really focusing in on what that's going to entail because all we'll be talking about come Monday is the Super Bowl. But we'll be back here on the Lab follow-up with the 21st team picking in the draft, which will be the Cincinnati Bengals. So come back here on Monday when we'll be talking Cincinnati Bengals football, because now we're into the teams that made the postseason. So we'll be back talking Cincinnati Bengals football on Monday here on the Lab follow-up. Thank you for joining me. Have a good one. Enjoy the Super Bowl.
Chicago Bears.